Morning. I'm happy to see you all. Thank you for joining us from home. So we're going to continue on this morning with our series that we're calling Things I Wish Jesus Didn't Say. So for the past, several weeks, we've been exploring some of the more challenging things that Jesus said and did and taught during his ministry on earth. It's been a really fun experience, and I mean fun in the way that you say when something isn't necessarily enjoyable, but the fruits of it are worth the discomfort, Because if you ask me, and no one really did, I'd like to just ignore some of these things. I'd like to pretend they didn't exist. And I'm thinking particularly about what Chris taught us last week about not getting into the kingdom of God if we're holding on to anything too tightly. That was a good word, but it was tough. So we're kind of approaching the end of the series, and as we've collected all of this information about why Jesus challenges us and things that make us uncomfortable for various reasons, I dialed in on another passage that I'd rather Jesus hadn't said. It comes from the very end of the book of Matthew. We sometimes call this the Great Commission. So I'm going to be reading from Matthew chapter 28, starting at verse 16. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always to the end of the age." For me, this passage conjures up visions of street corner evangelism, handing out tracts, yelling at people about their sins, scaring people out of hell and into a relationship with Jesus. Or those people who form relationships with other folks, like the cashier at the grocery store, or their kids' friend's mom at the playground, but they're not interested in these people for who they are. They want to put kind of another tally mark on their scorecard of souls saved. I don't think I'm the only one with these associations either. Right? Anybody else? Yeah? Thank you. Thanks, bud. So my tendency has been to just sort of conveniently overlook this part of what Jesus told us. I mean, I'm pretty in favor of the baptizing them part. I'm baptized. Both of my kids are baptized. I find myself taking so much comfort in the other part of what Jesus said, that he promises to be with us always. That's really comforting, especially in, say, a global pandemic that feels like it will literally never end. But the making disciples part, that feels really tricky. You see, I just can't get behind the idea of having relationships with an agenda. We build relationships out of shared values or shared interests, like in a church or a sport or watching a game. We build them out of proximity, like neighborhood friends, school friends. But having an express goal of, I must befriend this person and gain their trust to convert them to my religion, feels really gross to me. And I know that folks who approach things this way would never put it that way. I don't think they think that it's gross. But for me, that's what it comes down to. That's the agenda, even if it's not stated as such. And while sometimes that does result in a relationship where someone gets saved, they join your church, and then you're friends forever, I have seen it go not that way a whole bunch of times. Because if your goal for a relationship is for the other person to do or say, or even more nebulously, believe certain things, we run into some problems. The first is obviously that you can't control what other people say or do, and you certainly can't control what they believe. And trying to do so leads to manipulation. Also, what happens if they don't convert? In my observation, the evangelizer disappears. the relationship is seen as a failure and maybe even a threat to that person's own faith if the other person doesn't respond the way that we expect them to. I actually think it's even more problematic if they do convert. Because have we handed them a faith that will stand up to trials? If the basis of the message that we're telling people is one of the following, and I'm going to make you a little bullet list. If you say the magic words and mean them, ostensibly, you'll be out of hell and into heaven after you die. Or if we tell them, if you say the magic words and again mean them, you'll not only get out of hell and into heaven when you die, but you'll also receive some kind of reward and or be protected from bad things in this life as long as you continue doing the right things. Or if we're telling them, you're a horrible wretch on your own, just terrible, just garbage. But if you say the magic words and believe them, God will tolerate you enough not to damn you to hell. Guys, none of that sounds like good news to me. Not a bit. Not at the beginning and not at the end. So when you've converted someone or gotten them saved, and then they lose a parent or a child, or encounter a terrifying diagnosis, or they see what happens in Afghanistan, or here with the pandemic, well, what have we given them that's good news? Because I tell you what, God tolerates you, or, well, at least when you shuffle loose of the mortal coil, you won't be damned to hell for all eternity. That's not good news to someone staring down the barrel of a cancer diagnosis. But I actually think that the street corner evangelism or the agenda relationship, those are the wrong ways to understand, I think, Jesus' command here. What does he actually say? He says to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them, teaching them to obey all that I have commanded you. Well, I don't read anything there about praying a prayer or getting people saved. Honestly, as we've gone through Jesus' teachings these last few weeks with, a careful attention to detail, I don't actually understand where the idea of a one-time transactional getting saved comes from. I don't get it, guys. Instead, what I see Jesus asking of us is to become disciples ourselves and to go out and make more disciples. And you know what? That's even worse than the first versions we talked about. To me, that's so much harder than, say, handing out tracts on a street corner before Toledo Mud Hens baseball games. Ooh, is that too specific? Why would this be so much harder? Well, first off, it requires me to become a serious disciple of Jesus and to obey all that he's commanded us. That, as we've been discussing, is difficult and challenging on its own. Living the life of the age to come in the midst of the here and now is countercultural, maybe even especially in American churches these days. And it comes with a lot of vulnerability, and it's very risky for our egos, you guys. Living in community, true community, means giving other people the ability to hurt me. The closer and richer those relationships, the greater the capacity is for pain. But then, once we've become serious disciples of Jesus, we're supposed to go make more disciples, teaching them to obey all that Jesus has commanded us. So here's kind of another place where I think we get things wrong in our kind of white evangelical culture. I see discipleship represented as some sort of hierarchical relationship where one person who's usually older teaches another person or a group of people who are usually younger what they're supposed to do and not supposed to do. It's a very student-teacher relationship where there are like rights and wrongs that one person is imparting to another. I've heard people say, like, follow me as I follow Jesus. And that sort of exemplifies this way of thinking of discipleship. But I don't think that quite is right. I think that comes from a misunderstanding of what discipleship means and how it works. Because that faith looks like a straight line where those who are, ahead of you look back to teach you the same things as them that they learned. But the truth is that discipleship happens not in a line from top to bottom, but in a circle, in community. I've been a Christian my whole life, and the longer I follow Jesus, the fewer hard and fast answers I have for myself or anyone. But if instead of this hierarchical student or teacher-student relationship, we see discipleship in the context of community, I've heard it said, come with me and we follow Jesus together, instead of follow me as I follow Jesus. We see something really beautiful, but completely different than that hierarchical straight line version. No one has hard and fast answers for anyone else. But we do have companions on the journey together. I'm not responsible for teaching you what you should or shouldn't do, but instead, we're going to live our lives in partnership together. Sure, some of us have different kinds of knowledge and experience to share, but it's not a one-way street. I'm teaching you, you're teaching me, and sometimes we're just muddling through together. So in this version of discipleship, when I don't have an answer or when I'm not sure what to do, I tell my people my story. I ask them my questions, and we explore it together. I don't know why someone gets cancer, but I sure can sit with them when it happens. And I can't magically make illness disappear, but I can help feed a family or clean their house to lighten their load while they deal with it. I can't stop death from coming for our loved ones, but we can bear witness to their lives and love the ones who they leave behind, sit with them, hug them, feed them. We can celebrate together too. When someone graduates or gets married, we throw a party and we eat food and we dance. When there's a new baby, we fold laundry and we bring food. This might be just as important as sitting together through the bad stuff. Side note, I think if we're doing things right, there's a lot of feeding each other and eating together involved in community, and maybe a fair bit of dancing too. And we don't do this to form one another in our own images, but to grow more like Jesus together. Yet another reason this is a lot more difficult than getting people saved is that it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. And we are a society that is obsessed with quick fixes. We like for things to be binary. You are not saved one moment, and then you're saved the next, just like that. This isn't like that. Discipleship is not like that. It is, as the late Eugene Peterson put it, a long obedience in the same direction. I also think it's not linear. I think it's a lot more like a spiral. We grow and we change, but we keep coming back around to the same things with new eyes as we hopefully mature. Also, I don't think everyone's path looks the same, so the idea that there's some sort of straight line path from not saved through saved and on to in heaven after bodily death, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I don't think we can or should base our ideas of discipleship on a model like that. So now that I've gone on and on about the reasons I wish Jesus hadn't said this, what's the good news here? Well, I think there's a fair bit. Instead of a template for exactly what our journey in faith looks like, we get a teacher in Jesus and a community in one another to figure that out. We move from a system where we have to learn the right things and do them perfectly into a community where we all teach and learn in our seasons. We accompany one another through the ups and the downs and the boring times in between those up and downs. We bear each other up, call each other to be the true versions of ourselves, and, as I previously mentioned, eat good food together. But we never walk alone. In addition to Jesus' promise to be with us always, we get real and deep relationships where we get to bear one another up. I do want to come back and highlight the risk and the vulnerability here, because we would overlook it at our own peril. When we do discipleship this way, when we open up ourselves to be authentic and honest with our people and invite them to do the same with us, we are going to hurt others, and we are going to be hurt by them too. There is a 0% chance that we come out of this unscathed, for a number of reasons. First off, I don't know about you, but when I open myself up, there's some really ugly stuff under the hood. My people have seen the worst of me, and sometimes they see it because I let it come out at them despite my best efforts. But even if I can get it right, vulnerability is really scary, and there's always a chance that when they see those ugly things, they'll be unwilling to reciprocate with vulnerability of their own. And that hurts. I've even been vulnerable with people who then used my vulnerability against me. In my most mature and clear-headed moments, I know that they do that because they're too scared of something inside of themselves that they didn't have a choice but to break the relationship. But when it happens, it hurts. Those wounds are deep and they do not heal quickly. But let's envision a situation where we've all come to the table in good faith to be vulnerable and witness one another's vulnerability as we work to become more like Jesus together. Even then, with the best of intentions, injuries happen. We say things that hurt each other, and if we're going to be honest and vulnerable together, we have to confront each other and then listen with compassion and careful attention. It happens in ways big and small every day, and it's really messy and it's truly beautiful. One of my favorite authors, Glennon Doyle, calls things like this brutiful, a mix of brutal and beautiful, and you cannot separate the two. In community, as we make disciples of ourselves and each other, we see glimpses of God's kingdom inbreaking in our own lives. In this way, I think that we can see Jesus' instruction here as less of like an item on our spiritual to-do list, where we need to keep a running tally of who we've gotten saved, and instead, it is an invitation into a beautiful life together. I don't have to feel guilty for doing a better job of telling strangers about the gospel of Ted Lasso than I do about Jesus, because it's true. Because discipleship isn't actually about hit-and-run evangelism tactics, but the long, hard work of becoming more like Jesus together. I think we're doing that here at Ekklesia, imperfectly for sure, because perfection is impossible, but we're cultivating a community here who doesn't expect our leaders to have all of the answers, and who value the littlest of our members just as much as the smartest or the oldest or the richest or the whateverist. And we have a lot to learn too. We're navigating this season of uncertainty about our physical space together, and that's hard and good work for us to do together. Guys, I worked really hard, but I don't have a neat bow to put on this message. I don't have something quippy for you to take into the week. I just know that studying this passage has highlighted for me how important humility is, to admit that I don't have any magic answers here. And it has reminded me how important community is, where we work together and side by side to learn from Jesus, so that we can carry the healing and justice of God's kingdom out into a world who so desperately needs it.